On the night of the 24th to 25th of March 1944, the Great Escape took place. 78 officers of the Royal Air Force and other Allied air forces who were prisoners of war at the Stalag Luft 3 POW camp at Sagan, today Jagan, in Lower Silesia, escaped through a tunnel they had been digging for many months. The escape had been carefully planned, and the officers, who had to varying degrees civilian clothes and false papers, attempted to make it to a neutral country from where they could continue on to the United Kingdom. Only 3 made it to the United Kingdom, 2 Norwegians and 1 person from the Netherlands. The rest were recaptured. The escape was a major embarrassment for the German authorities. The head of the criminal police, the Kripo, at Breslau, today Wrocław, in whose area it had occurred, ordered a Großfahndung, a major manhunt. This was probably the objective of the escape. Some of the escapees no doubt wanted to get back into the war, but most realised that the best help that they could do to help the Allied cause was to divert manpower from war production to searching for escapees. They knew that their chances of making a home run were slim indeed. On the 26th of March 1943, the news of the escape reached Hitler at Berchtesgaden, and after consultations with Göring, Keitel and Himmler, he gave the verbal order that more than half of the escapees were to be shot. The order was eventually issued from the RSHA, Reichssicherheitshauptamt, the Reich Security Main Office, and sent by teleprint to the regional Gestapo officers. The teleprint read, "The frequent mass escapes of officer prisoners constitutes a real danger to the security of the state. I am disappointed by the inefficient security measures in various prisoner of war camps. The Führer has ordered that as a deterrent more than half of the escaped officers will be shot. The recaptured officers will be handed over to the Gestapo for interrogation. After interrogation, the officers will be transferred to their original camps and will be shot on the way. The reason for the shooting will be given as shot while trying to escape or shot while resisting, so that nothing can be proved at a future date. Prominent persons will be exempted. The names will be reported to me, and I will decide on the course of action to be taken." In Nazi Germany, there was a difference between the Kripo, the criminal police, and the Gestapo, the secret police. It was the responsibility of the criminal police to locate the escapees and then to select more than half of them to be handed over to the Gestapo. The decision on who would live or die was made by the head of the Kripo, the criminal police, Arthur Neber. Australian squadron leader James Kattanak, who was 22, New Zealander Flight Lieutenant Arnold Christiansen, who was also 22, and Norwegian Lieutenants Niels Fulgersang, 25, and Haldor Esperid, 23, had made it across hundreds of kilometres by train. They were spotted by other escapees in Berlin, where they changed trains for Hamburg. From Hamburg they got as far as Flensburg on the Danish border. Their aim appears to have been Sweden. This was a logical destination. 2 Norwegian speakers plus Christiansen, who spoke Swedish, and Kattanak, who had been attempting to learn Norwegian. They had probably got past identity checks on their journey, but at the border things were considerably tighter. They were travelling separately, pretending to be travelling individually, hoping to reduce the risk of capture. However, they were all in the same railway carriage, and there were a lot of police officers. In their cases, they were carrying escape rations, and their greatcoats appeared to have been dyed. The escapees were arrested and taken to Flensburg prison. The Kripo informed the Gestapo. In Kiel on the morning of the 29th of March 1944, Sturmbannführer Schmidt called 7 officers to his office. He informed them that a special assignment had to be carried out on a secret Reich matter of the Reich Security Main Office. Failure to comply would result in the harshest punishment, the death penalty for them, and major problems for members of their family. The 7 Gestapo officials were to murder the 4 pilots. Schmidt ordered Post to go to Flensburg prison where the officers were to be interrogated. Then they were to be shot en route to Hamburg. The place of execution had already been chosen beforehand, and it was on the Hamburger Landstrasse near Schüllensee, a couple of kilometers from the centre of Kiel. The 7 officers from Kiel arrived in Flensburg in 2 cars at around 1300 hours. With their colleagues from Flensburg, they first went to the Harmony restaurant for lunch. As ordered, the 4 prisoners were briefly interrogated after lunch in the early afternoon and finally taken to the 2 vehicles with their hands tied behind their backs. In the first car were 3 Gestapo officials and prisoner James Katanach. The prisoners Arnold Christiansen, Niels Fulgensang and Haldor Esplid were uncomfortably seated in the rear seats of the second car, in which the other 4 Gestapo officials were too. On the way to the murder site, the second car lost contact with the first vehicle on Eckenförder Strasse in Kiel. One of the Gestapo men had managed to get a theatre ticket for a friend, and he had previously arranged to give it to him. Therefore, the driver was ordered to turn onto Gutenbergstrasse and drive to Hansastrasse, where the Gestapo officer's friend was waiting. The Gestapo officials then drove with their prisoners to the Hamburger Landstrasse near Rottenhahn and stopped at the previously selected murder site. Meanwhile, the car with Katanachs had stopped at this site. 2 officials from the second car had checked that nothing was coming along the road in either direction and to keep passers-by away from the impending murder. The prisoners were led through a gate onto a meadow, still handcuffed behind their backs. Shortly afterwards, one of the captured officers suddenly screamed, and the Gestapo officials shot them all in the back with pistols. It would appear that one of the men appeared not to have been hit. He was finished off by 2 shots from a rifle as he tried to get up. The other officers were then each shot in the head, with 1 shot from the carbine. After the murder, the handcuffs were removed from the murdered officers and guarded by 2 officials until they were picked up. Schmidt received orders to instruct a funeral home to take the body to the crematorium at Eichhof Cemetery and have them burnt there. Gestapo officer Johannes Post has been said to be the idea behind the Gestapo officer in the 1963 film The Great Escape. In this video, I shall look at the life and crimes of Johannes Post. Johannes Robert Adolf Post was born here in Danzig, today Gdańsk in Poland, on the 11th of November 1908. His father was a business person. When he was 11, Danzig became an independent state designed to give the newly recreated Poland access to the sea. However, a dockyard strike in 1920 convinced the Polish authorities that they could not rely on the port. The Polish government thus opted for the very expensive option of building a completely new port just up the coast within its own territory. This meant that Danzig, a city that lived from sea trade, now had to compete for business with another city just beside it at a time when world trade was in decline. The result was severe economic problems, which contributed to the support for the National Socialist Party. Johannes Post completed a commercial apprenticeship after finishing school and then worked as a salesperson in Gdańsk. Post became a member of the Nazi Party, membership number 465273, and the SA in 1930. Together with other National Socialists, Post was involved in street battles with communists and participated in the shooting of the communist Karl Pachur in the early 1930s. For this act, he was indicted alongside 23 others and held up before the Gdańsk Assize Court and sentenced to 26 months in prison for bodily harm resulting in death. However, Post did not even have to serve this ridiculously weak sentence. In May 1933, the Nazis won the only fair national election at which they got the majority of the votes. They took the Danzig parliament, the Volkstag. As a result, Post was granted amnesty in 1933 and then worked full-time in the SA in Danzig. From 1935 he worked for the police from this building and was promoted to detective inspector in 1938. In 1939, he switched from the SA to the SS membership number 313999 with the rank of Sturmbannführer, the lowest commissioned officer rank in the SS, usually considered to be equivalent of that of major. He moved around various offices in Germany and later in the occupied territories. On the 21st of September 1939, Reinhard Heydrich suggested to Adolf Hitler that a Jewish reserve be created somewhere on the eastern border of the German Reich. SS-Sturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann arranged for a barracks camp to be built in Nisko in occupied Poland. He demanded that the Viennese Jewish community draw up a list of 1,000 to 1,200 workers consisting of carpenters, mechanics and others who could build the place. They were to stay in Ostrava in occupied Czechoslovakia for 4 weeks. Between the 19th and 20th of October, 3 transport trains with 901 deportees from Ostrava, 912 from Vienna and 875 from Katowice arrived in Nisko. Post was in charge of the deportation train that left Ostrava. Isidor Zengut, a witness from Ostrava, said later, on the 17th of October 1939, Jewish men were summoned to the riding school in Ostrava. They were allowed to take one piece of luggage weighing about 50 kilograms each. From there, they were taken to the station and provided wagons. There, in these wagons, they spent the first night. The following day, they were transferred via Bochum and Krakow to the station of Nisko on the San. On the 19th of October 1939, we were grouped according to our professions. The transport commander had a special interest in builders and doctors. I, as a builder, stepped out of the transport. A few minutes later, Adolf Eichmann stepped in front of us. He spoke briefly and gave us terse orders on how the camp should be built. He put emphasis on the erection of a machine gun turret in the middle of the camp. In early 1942, Post was transferred to the Kiel Gestapo. Whilst here, as he was considered to be an old fighter within the party, he was awarded the Blood Order of the National Socialist Party for his commitment during the fighting period. It was also here 2 years later that he was to murder the 4 Allied airmen on the orders of the head of the Kiel Gestapo, Fritz Schmidt. Schmidt had a very bloody history. He had been second in command of Sonderkommando 4A of Einsatzgruppe C, which murdered Jews in Ukraine. From January 1943, he was also temporary head of Sonderkommando 4A. He was moved to the Kiel Gestapo in February 1944. Soon after his move to Kiel, Fritz Schmidt applied for the establishment of a labour education camp, Arbeitssicherungslager. There was a difference in organisation between a labour education camp and a concentration camp, but for the victims it would have made little difference, as the conditions were the same. On the 1st of May 1944, the architect Steinfass was commissioned by the Gestapo to supervise the building. The work was carried out in May and June 1944 on the Rendsburger Landstrasse by Nord-Süd-Bau GmbH and its subcontractors. However, these companies only supplied the skilled workers. The unskilled workers were prisoners of the Gestapo. SS-Sturmbannführer Johannes Post was put in charge of this camp. His deputy was Otto Baumann. In this plan we can see what the camp looked like. There were prisoner barracks, accommodation for the guards including an SS guest house with 2 watchtowers. The detention bunker was semi-underground with 48 completely dark individual cells measuring around 180 centimetres by 1 metre. The unheated prisoner barracks were intended for 200 people each. There was an infirmary barracks cared for by a conscripted German doctor who was aided by a doctor from Russia, a nurse and a Danish paramedic. The Danish paramedic was Ole Egil Jensen, who occasionally killed those in his charge. Otto Baumann stated to a British military tribunal on the 13th of November 1947 that orders for executions, either by hanging or shooting, were passed by Fritz Schmidt to Post. The guards at the camp were not only German, but also from the Netherlands, Denmark and Latvia. On arrival, prisoners had to surrender their valuables and clothes and exchange them for camp clothes. Camp clothing was later dispensed with, and instead red crosses were painted on the prisoners' clothing, making them recognisable. Between 4,000 and 5,000 people passed through the camp, at least 578 of whom did not survive. Most of them were Soviet or Polish slave labourers. According to eyewitnesses, the treatment of the prisoners was similar to that of a concentration camp. They were driven to work to the point of complete exhaustion, beaten and also arbitrarily shot. The working day started at 0500 and lasted 10 hours. In the camp itself, the work consisted of the construction of new barracks and the repair of roads. Outside the camp, the prisoners had to clear debris and kill, locate unexploded ordnance from bombing raids, and participate in the construction of bunkers and fortress defences. Furthermore, the workers were used by local companies as cheap labour. These companies included the Holsten Brewery, Land und See Leichtbau GmbH, the concrete construction company Ola and Loviser, and the Nordland Fish Factory in Hassasee. Work outside the camp, however, was usually more manageable than that under the constant supervision of guards who had no idea of business efficiency and who were more interested in torturing the prisoners rather than getting the job done. In mid-April 1945, prisoners from death marches start to arrive in the camp. The prisoners came from Fuhlsbüttel, a subcamp of the Neuengamme concentration camp, and from the Riga ghetto, amongst others. In 2 weeks before the end of the war, about 300 people were shot and buried in mass graves. The guards destroyed incriminating files and many set off north, trying to escape in the direction of Denmark before the Allies reached the camp. One of those that initially headed north was Post. Late on the 3rd of May 1945, the British 8th Corps reached the camp, where only a few half-starved prisoners remained. Post was the commandant throughout the lifetime of the camp. At least 578 people lost their lives there, and he therefore is primarily responsible for their deaths. Following the murders of the escapees from the Sagan POW camp, it was announced in the British House of Commons that the perpetrators would be found and tried. After the collapse of the Third Reich, it was possible to hunt down those responsible. The task was given to Wing Commander Wilfred Bowles of the RAF Special Investigations Branch, who was assisted by Squadron Leader Frank McKenna, formerly a Detective Sergeant of the Blackpool Police, and Flight Lieutenant Frank Lyon, formerly a Detective Inspector in the Metropolitan Police. They were aided by 14 non-commissioned officers. In 1947, the commandant of the holding facility in Minden called McKenna to say that the Northwest Europe War Crimes Unit had just brought in a man working as a haulage contractor. The man's name was Johannes Post, but he had been identified by a witness as former Gestapo officer Johannes Post. McKenna went to see the prisoner and pulled from his tunic a picture of Post. The face was thinner, but the eyes and prominent chin left no doubt in his mind. Post was arrested and taken to the Fuhlsbüttel police prison in Hamburg. From there, he was brought to the UK and held in the London cage. Here, he was interrogated by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Scotland. The record shows that he was putting on an act by being arrogant. Scotland said that with the exception of SS officer Reinhold Bruchard, Post was the most cruel and brutal Nazi he had ever interrogated. It would seem that his arrogance was such that he was struck by a guard whilst in London. The interrogation complete, he was transferred back to Germany for trial. Post was indicted with 17 other suspects before a British military court-martial. Post and 13 others involved in the killing of the Sagan escapees were sentenced to death for the murder of Allied officers on the 3rd of September 1947. The sentence was carried out by British executioner Albert Pierpont on the 27th of February 1948 in Hamlin Prison. I hope you found that interesting. I upload every Friday at 2000 hours and sometimes at other times as well as doing frequent live talks. If you're interested in history, then you might want to subscribe. My specialization is in the World War II and in particular in the Holocaust. Thanks for being with me today.